Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and this is the Backlog. This week I started off with Castlevania by Konami. I specifically played it on the collection that they put out for Switch. While I like Metroidvanias and have even played the Castlevania-inspired Bloodstained, I've never actually played any of the games that the second half of the genre name is taken from. And even though I knew that it was like this, do you know how weird it feels that the first Castlevania isn't a Metroidvania? It's a more traditional setup, with you just traveling through a linear set of levels, fighting your way to the boss each time until you kill the final villain. Each stage has checkpoints, and running out of lives resets you to the beginning of the level. What is a bit unique is how the power-ups function. While there's a few I didn't quite peg down the purpose of, there's one set that upgrades your main weapon from sword to whip to longer whip, and there's a whole slew of secondaries that you can switch between by finding the appropriate drop, that vary in effectiveness by situation and personal preference. You need to pick up ammo for these in the form of hearts, which took me an embarrassingly long time to figure out. The game isn't very long, but decently challenging. I'd imagine that someone who has it down to an art could clear it in under 20 minutes, but most people will probably take a few hours to squeak out a win. Part of this is just how unforgiving the game can be. You have a life bar of, I believe, 15 units, but you still die in 4 hits. There is very little healing, with the wall chickens being not as abundant as I'd been led to believe. There's a lot of knockback when you get hit, which can lead to you getting one shot if you're too close to a cliff. Sometimes the stage just won't be too generous with the weapons that you really want or need. The enemies can move quickly and erratically, whereas Simon feels a bit clunkier and stiff. Then again, this was my first time touching the game, so I could see this becoming much more manageable and second nature if more time was put into it. I suppose I wouldn't call it unfair, instead having more of a learning curve, though I could see it coming across that way early on. It took me around an hour to beat, which I did with honor and skill and definitely not anything else, though the collection does offer a save state option, so cheesing it is an option that I totally didn't do, especially not after every hit against the final kinda bullcrap boss to get a perfect run. There's also some display options and a few other features that I haven't messed around with. The collection has 8 games on it, each taking only a few hours to clear on average, so I think I'll try to tackle one a week to make sure that I have at least one game to talk about, and I guess I'll discuss the whole package in about 2 months. I liked what I played so far though, so I'm looking forward to fiddling around with the other 7. I also picked Animal Crossing New Horizons back up. Well, saying I picked it back up might be too strong a phrase. I needed something to stream, so I popped it back into my Switch so that I could bait the title by saying it was my first time playing in almost 2 years. They added a fair bit, like the roost in the museum, stretching exercises, and diving, all of which I messed with, and some other stuff that I didn't, like farming and cooking, which I have absolutely no interest in. Animal Crossing is such a weird game for me because on paper it sounds like the sort of thing I would hate, yet it typically manages to suck me in for a few months, being the only thing I really play, and then me getting bored and dropping it forever, at least until the next one comes out when I begin the cycle anew. This doesn't seem to have changed too much here. I picked it up for a stream gimmick, but wasn't really grabbed by it. Don't get me wrong, I still enjoy it. This game in particular has a lot of checklists, which I get an odd satisfaction when filling out. And while I do bemoan the lack of personality of the villagers, there being only about 12 very basic ones that they fall into, I still do enjoy visiting with them. While I was playing it for the past several days, I relearned the controls, got down my old routine, opened the roost, interacted with several visiting NPCs, used my new amiibo cards to move someone in and someone out, and celebrated a birthday. While that might sound like a lot, and I didn't even mention everything, I started to get bored again before even the first stream ended, so while I might fiddle with it for another week yet, I don't think I'll go far beyond that. It's the sort of game that if I had infinite time, I might play it a bit every day, but as it is, I just have a lot more that I'd rather be playing. I don't think I'll ever have as much fun with it as I did in the first month or so, as I was still getting things set up and learning the ins and outs. That said, I did pick up 1 or 2 subscribers on the Victory Tricksters, and I am planning on doing one more stream for the heck of it, so if that does numbers, I would probably resign myself to becoming an Animal Crossing streamer. Which reminds me, I've been thinking about specializing my content more. If you do watch this channel, would you mind terribly commenting on what type of stuff you like watching here, be it specific games like Mega Man or Pokemon, or different formats like stream clips, poetry, or the backlog videos. Any feedback would be appreciated, and I have some other ideas I might try out if I can figure out how I want to execute them. The last game I tackled was Earthbound Beginnings. I originally picked this up along with Earthbound on the Wii U, but since I had a bit of trouble with the sequel and put it down, I never went back and played the original Mother. Recently, they added it to NSO, and since the friend that I normally play games with on the system wasn't able to play anything himself for a bit, he agreed to sit through a playthrough with me. And now that I've gotten through it, I have to say, you've done it again. You've confused me as to why so many people like this game. I imagine it's because of how quirky the game is, but for me, more often than not, this works more against it than in its favor. I like how it's baked into the setting. The game seems to take place in a spoof of America in the 1980s, and rather than have your typical heroes or mascots, the player characters are just a group of kids. Their designs remind me of the characters from the Peanuts comic strip, and the Birdman characters somehow look like a fusion of Snoopy and Woodstock. To me, anyway. A lot of the enemies also strike me as more cartoony than anime, which really does feel unique for a JRPG. It might seem like a silly distinction to make, but I do feel like it makes it stand out, and honestly the visuals really did charm me. There's a lot of simple deviations from the typical formula besides that, such as the weapons not being swords and spears, but bats and boomerangs, spells being psychic powers, and the plot centering around not a mission to kill God, but the need to repel an honest-to-goodness UFO invasion. You also earn money from winning fights, but it gets deposited directly into your bank account and only after you call your father on the phone, which is also how you save. Plus, you can not only rename your characters, which I gave them all of the stupid simple ones you see here, but you can also name your favorite food, which you can eat to recover back at your home. And having my mom serve me D's nuts never really got old, no matter how many times I went back. And while your party is limited to 3, you can also get little tag-along NPCs that will fight alongside you, acting independently to help you out. Earthbound was one of the main inspirations for Undertale, and I can definitely see it in not only the smaller, more intimate scale, but also how there's a few boss fights that are impossible to win unless you take unique action. This game definitely sets itself apart when it comes to style and has a very cute and cool look. The part that drives me crazy is the randomness of it all. Everything in this game seems tied into RNG. There's your typical RPG stuff like crits and misses. Then there's the encounter rate, which feels pretty unbalanced. Sometimes you can wander around for a bit without incident. Other times you can walk 2 steps after a battle, only to enter another, with the latter being the case more often than the former. It can make progress pretty slow going. There's also what you encounter. Sometimes you can be going around an area, stomping everything that comes your way when all of a sudden, into the rotation pops an enemy that you can do next to nothing against. There are also enemies that you can beat quite easily but will explode upon defeat to deal damage that you're better off running from, though whether escape is possible is also a roll of the dice. Whether you learn a new move after battle also seems random. There's one character that is better at using an item rather than attacking normally, and whether this weapon breaks is also up to chance, and there are items that can refill your PP that you use for psi attacks that sometimes get consumed and sometimes can be reused. I think this is the most luck-based game that I have ever played, and I kinda hate it. I don't mind some elements of chance in games, and luck typically does play some part, but here it seems to supersede everything, to the point where having a horseshoe, rabbit's foot, and 4-leaf clover seems more important than being appropriately leveled and equipped. I'm not even gonna lie to you like I did with Castlevania and just admit that I got through the game by save scumming, though unlike the former, where I did it more for expediency, here it was to save my sanity from all the times I got just a really bad roll and was harshly punished for it. I really don't know that I could have mentally taken this had I not played it with that modern convenience. I'm really glad I played this with another person because there were several times that I was assured that it was not just me with the utter random bullcrap the game would throw my way, and a lot of times I didn't even need to prompt them. All of this I can chalk up to a matter of taste though. I hate gambling and games of chance. My least favorite part of every Dragon Quest game are the sections where I have to interact with the casino. Someone who does like a little more chance in their games though would probably find all this delightful, and honestly, given that I stopped checking in on my bank balance, which I could have used to revive people, I probably was expected to get KO'd a lot more, which probably would have balanced the game economy as opposed to my reloading after each cheap shot. I'm willing to say that this just wasn't for me with all these elements, but there's still just one thing that I honestly can't excuse, and that's the UI. Maybe it was a hardware restriction, but it worked pretty much the same in Earthbound from what I remember, so I kinda think this was a choice. There is no interact button. Instead, you hold B to run and pressing A will bring up a menu. instead of using Start or Select. The menu itself is also a pain, giving you the option to check, talk, use your items, check your stats, use your psi, or change the setup. And if you press talk when you mean to hit check, or check when you mean to talk, you'll get a message either telling you that everything's normal or asking what you're trying to do. It's kinda cute at first, but it gets old real fast. More than that though is how you need to navigate the menu each time you want to do something. If you want to heal your party, you need to open it and choose the psi option. Each time you want to cast it, it closes out after each use. If you want to organize your items, you have to bring up the menu, choose goods, go to the right tab, find the item you want, choose who you want to give it to, and then start the whole process over again. I don't understand why I can't just stay in the menu and then choose to close out of it once I'm totally done. Why did they make it such a chore and so darn painful is beyond me. Then there's how everything is labeled. You have a slew of stats which don't really make sense to me. There's at least 3 that seem like they could be tied into how much damage you do, but could just as easily be superfluous. Then there are your spells. Most of them have a name followed by a Greek letter. Some you can piece together, like Life Up refilling health and PK Thunder doing damage, with the stronger versions being the one further down the list. The main problem is your status lifting spells. There's a set of them that each fix a specific ailment, all being labeled healing and with a symbol. There's no good way to tell which does what other than looking them up or memorizing them. Both the stats and psi might have not been as big of a deal if it came with an instruction booklet, and while you can still pull up an FAQ online, it is still kind of annoying to have to stop what you're doing to perform a quick Google search. The controls are also kinda rough. Moving left to right is simple enough, but up and down work more on a diagonal plane, which can be a little awkward at points. It's also really easy to get caught on things, which this only makes worse. More than that though is sometimes the controls are just unresponsive. There were times when I had to really jam a direction after my first attempt didn't seem to register. It felt like even movement was RNG based. With this being an RPG, it would have been annoying, but tolerable if not for 2 things. First is how some of the NPCs move around. Having to fight the controls when I was already having trouble interacting with characters as they would just randomly move to the left as I tried to click on them just made things worse. Then there is the fast travel psi. You would choose a place to warp to, then have to run forward for a certain distance uninterrupted to complete the spell, your pace increasing as you went. This could already be tricky in some of the twistier or more cluttered areas, but when your inputs just wouldn't take, it took what seemed at first a cute little twist on fast travel and made it a monumental annoyance. While I complained about Castlevania seeming a bit sluggish, this slower paced RPG was a much bigger nightmare to control much of the time. I was curious about Earthbound and the Mother series, so I don't regret playing Earthbound Beginnings. That said, now that I'm done, I don't think I'll ever play it again. It was just tolerable enough for one playthrough to see what the fuss was about, so despite all my complaints, I wouldn't actually discourage anyone from giving the game a go. I would just strongly recommend that you make sure that the format you use also allows you to create save states though that you can save scum. Honestly, it strikes me as a game that would benefit heavily from a remake, making the controls and menus smoother to navigate, and rebalancing enemy encounters and some RNG chances. As for the original though, I guess I'd just tell Mother that I'm not mad, just disappointed. Now go to your room. Do you think that I missed an opportunity by not putting out the Earthbound Beginnings review a week later on Mother's Day? Then again, using Mother's Day to dunk on a game called Mother might be in bad taste. Anyway, in miscellaneous news, I got the Kirby and the Forgotten Land theme in Tetris 99, and I busted down my local GameStop's door at opening to snag a Min-Min amiibo. I still need to train it, so if I need something to talk about next week, it might come up in conversation. But that's it for this episode, so thanks for watching, maybe subscribe if you enjoy this sort of thing, and perhaps I'll see you in the next one.